it's a bit odd sort of parachuting in from outside. But I'm reminded of one of my brothers who gave a lecture in Chicago. And at the end, the applause wasn't very enthusiastic. And he sat down, and the man beside him, he said to the man beside him, I hope it wasn't that bad, was it? And the man said, oh, I don't blame you. He said, I don't blame you at all. He said, I just blame whoever asked you to come and speak in the first place. I've been asked to talk to you about being a saint. What does it mean to be a saint? Being a saint often sounds rather boring. And I think that this is entirely wrong. Because being a saint is slowly, sometimes painfully, becoming the person that God created you to be. Often we don't want to be a saint because it's easier just to go with the crowd. It's easy just to take one of the identities that our society offers us. There's an enormous pressure in our society to brand yourself by the clothes that you wear. I mean, I don't understand them at all, but anyway. What are the latest fashions, your hairstyle? I'll give you the name of my barber afterwards if you want to know. Whether you got an iPhone or a BlackBerry. These are all ways of having identities. And we want to have an identity which has got a bit of respectability, which is impressive. I telephoned a young friend of mine called Michael, who's 18, and I said, well, who are the role models these days? And he said, I haven't heard of half of them, but anyway, he said, oh, Katie Price, Kanye West, Beyonce, have I got that right? Yeah, more or less. Rihanna, Wayne Rooney, no, I know him. And Michael said, these are the people that people follow on Twitter. These are the role models. These are the people that a lot of young people would like to imitate. And our society is fascinated by celebrities. You know the definition of a celebrity? Celebrity is somebody who's famous for being famous. You know, the rich person, or the witty person, or the sexy person, or even the holy person. I overheard somebody say the other day, oh, he is the third most intelligent person in Oxford. It's terrible, you see, trying to get a sort of a pre-made identity. But to be somebody who's a saint is to be yourself. And becoming yourself is actually a hard, long challenge. It means you refuse to fit into the stereotypes. You will always challenge them. Saints are always nonconformist. So if you hear somebody making a remark that's racist or homophobic, you'll refuse to go with it. You'll challenge it. Once Archbishop Desmond Tutu was another great man. He was walking along a pavement, and there was this big, hefty white man coming in the other direction who said to him, "Get out of my way," he said. "I don't give way to gorillas." And Tutu said, but I do. So, I think a saint is somebody who has the courage not to conform. And there was this comedian who was getting 1,000 people to laugh at his jokes, which were mainly against religion. And the message was very simple. It was that if you believe all this stuff, you know, about resurrection from the dead and Jesus being God, you must be pretty stupid. Actually, I think he was pretty stupid. And then at one stage, he got all the crowd sort of whipped up. And he said, I mean, are there any Christians here? And there was this one young lad who put up his hand, 1 out of 1,000. And I admired him. Now, I don't know whether he was a saint, but he'd taken one of the first steps, I think, to sanctity, which is to refuse just to belong to the mob. But if you become somebody who's touched by God's sanctity, you've got no interest in rivalry. Because, I mean, nobody else wants to be Timothy Radcliffe, so there's no competition. It also means that you won't see people, therefore, as rivals. You won't be just stuck in the center of your own little world. You know, that narcissistic egoism. So what sanctity does is it liberates you from your narrow little world in which you see other people as rivals or threats. So are saints role models? I think Neil probably told you that they were. I'd say yes and no. Somebody like St. Dominic, who was, of course, the greatest saint that there ever was, very objective. He's obviously somebody who, in some sense, is a role model. Or Francis of Assisi, or Mother Teresa of Calcutta, whom I spent a month with once. At the beginning, you know, they are sort of role models, but in the end, you can't be them. In the end, you have to be yourself. There was a famous Jewish rabbi who said that when he died and he went before God, God wouldn't say, "Why weren't you Moses? Why weren't you Abraham? Why weren't you Jacob?" He'd say, "Why weren't you yourself?" And that's the challenge. We probably think of saints as people who are incredibly good, that they have no temptations, never have an impure thought, you know? But if you look at the great saints, they've always got there, probably falling on their faces a lot of times. And what was fantastic about St. Peter was that he kept falling on his face. He had his great moment of triumph. He confessed that Jesus was the Christ, the Son of the living God. And he was really proud. And then he couldn't understand that Jesus had to go and suffer and die. And so Jesus says to him, "Get behind me, Satan." If Jesus said that to me, I think I would have sort of disappeared rapidly and gone back to fishing. But Peter hangs in there. He doesn't give up. He goes back to the Lord. And then, a few months later, on the night before Jesus died, there's Peter saying, "I'd die, all the others would deny you, but I won't. I'll be faithful." 1 hour later, there he is saying he's never met Jesus in his life. Massive collapse. And finally, there's a legend about how right at the end of Peter's life, about 25 years later, there's a persecution in Rome, and Peter runs away. And as he's running away from Rome, he meets the Lord coming towards Rome. And he says to the Lord, "Where are you going? Quo vadis?" And Jesus says, "I go to die a second time." And finally, at the end, finally, Peter dares to turn round and go back and face martyrdom. So becoming a saint's a long business. And real saints fall on their face lots of times. Now let's take this little reading from the Transfiguration, and I'll just pick out a couple of quick lessons that gives us about holiness. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up a mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. that has made 3 dwellings for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. That's the first bit. They're on the mountain with Jesus. And Peter wants to go on enjoying this moment. God takes pleasure in us. And so it's good for us to take pleasure in God. Just to be with God sometimes. Quietly. It's a real sign that you are friends with somebody when you don't have to talk to them all the time. But you can just be quiet with them. And I think one of the things that saints do is that they take pleasure, like Peter on the mountain, of just being there with God in silence. A lot of our prayer is very loud and noisy, and we sing. And that's great, that's fantastic. But I think it's also good to have those moments when you are just silent, just in God's presence. So I think sometimes in the silence, you get touched by God. There was an old Dominican who came to live with us. He was about 80. And he was known as the most difficult man in the English province. And, you know, normally we Dominicans are all extremely pleasant and lovely to live with. But this guy was an exception. He was a selfish old friar. And one day, you know, just about 2 months before he died, he had some experience of the heavens opening and of being touched by God's joy. And it changed his life. He became, for the first time, somebody that we love to live with. And he told me about how when he'd been a child, his parents never ever spoke to each other, not a word. They only talked through him. But finally, he had this experience in the middle of the night, and that changed him. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that Peter has to listen to Jesus. And Jesus tells him he's got to go down the mountain, he's got to go to Jerusalem, and there he's got to suffer and to die. But this is the other aspect, I think, of becoming a saint. It actually involves a journey, a great adventure. I think most of us love adventure stories. Harry Potter, for example. I think what we have to discover, as Peter and the others discovered, was actually becoming a saint is the greatest adventure that there is. It'll turn your life upside down. It'll make you and unmake you. I think if we're going to be a saint, then we'll have to live through great adventures. And they can be of many sorts. It could be risking your life. I think in the end that's the test, really, isn't it? Would you be prepared to die for your faith? If you want to see the beauty of people, you've got to get close. You've got to hold them in your arms. And then you'll see them. And that will change your life.